Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Archaeology of Mind, Neuroevolutionary Origins of Human Emotions, by Jaak Panksepp and Lucy Biven. Foreword by Daniel J. Siegel. Narrated by Peter Lerman. Publisher's note, this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit Tantor.com and type The Archaeology of Mind into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page. Then, under the Supplemental Content section, please enter the access code MIND, and then click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All visual material referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. Preface. All of us get angry at times, especially when our interests are ignored or thwarted. Has traditional brain science told us how this emotion is created? Not yet. We all get lonely and sad at times. Has modern neuroscience sought to clarify those aspects of our nature? We have barely begun to talk about such things, even though great progress has been made in some quarters. Most of us get great joy from interacting playfully with others. Some do not, especially if they are depressed. Neuroscience has remained largely silent about the nature of joy, while psychology has seen a revolution in the study and discussion of its cognitive derivative, happiness, with few insights into the neural nature of joy. Just like the many other emotional powers of our minds, all of which emerge from the functions of the brain, traditional neuroscience has had relatively little to tell us about how the intense emotional feelings that we call affects can arise from brain activities. This is because feelings are subjectively experienced, and some say the traditional third-person measurements of science, that is, external observation of phenomena, cannot deal effectively with first-person experiences. We disagree, to the extent that other mammals have evolutionarily related brain systems. Modern neuroscience is well poised to finally clarify the ways that the mammalian brain generates affective valuations of world events in the form of nonverbal feeling states, or the passions of the mind, as some Renaissance scholars would describe them. This book describes a new scientific discipline called affective neuroscience, which seeks to illuminate how our most powerful emotional feelings, the primal emotional affects, arise from ancient neural networks situated in brain regions below the neocortical thinking cap. The neocortex is an organ that generates complex cognitive abilities as well as culture, and it is definitely important for complex perceptions, learning, and cognitions. The neocortex is responsible for almost all of the cultural milestones that human beings have been able to achieve. And neuroscience has also provided an important message. Practically all of the psychological specializations within the cortex are learned. None has yet been empirically demonstrated to be an intrinsic, evolutionarily dictated module. However, the cortex could achieve nothing without an evolved foundational mind deeper in the brain. Those ancient neural territories below the neocortex constitute our ancestral mind, the affective mind, which is evolutionarily specialized and that we share with many other animals. It is archaeological treasure, for it contains the sources of some of our most powerful feelings. Those ancient subcortical brain systems are precious, multi-hued jewels for anyone wishing to understand the roots of all the basic values we have ever known and will experience in our lives. The affects are the foundations upon which the beauty and ugliness of life has been constructed. And affects also change with experience, but more quantitatively rather than qualitatively. This book is an updating and an attempt at popularizing an earlier textbook, Affective Neuroscience, The Foundations of Human and Animal Emotions. This text has garnered wide attention as a major new approach to the science of the emotional mind, and has become a source book for clinicians who wish to understand the basic emotions of their clients. Even though work on kindred animals has been so crucial to the development of affective neuroscience, Jaak Panksepp started his work with an interest primarily in human emotions, especially their disturbances in clinical disorders. He soon realized that deep neuroscientific understanding could not be achieved without appropriate animal models. This position has changed somewhat with the emergence of modern brain imaging, but not much if one wants to really understand the evolved functional networks of the brain. It is rather difficult to have intense emotions while lying still within brain scanners that make measurements that cannot tolerate movements. Still, the new evidence obtained with those spectacular human brain imaging technologies has clarified much about the cognitive aspects of emotion, but rather little about the sources of such feelings in the brain. The primary process emotions are all connected to movements, and the evidence now indicates that raw emotional feelings arise from the same ancient brain networks that control our instinctual emotional life. Despite many theories in the field, the facts indicate that these raw emotional feelings arise from the emotional action networks of the brain. Overall, the topic of emotions is of great interest to practically everyone, from psychiatrists who have to deal with human feelings that have become extreme, to anyone who is curious about those powerful states that govern so much of what we do and who we are in the world. We hope that what will be discovered between these covers will be of considerable use to many in their quest to understand themselves and others, including fellow animals, and to recognize how much all mammals share in the ways that they emotionally respond to the world. We suspect that many diverse groups of people will find these perspectives to be especially useful. Why psychiatrists, physicians, and psychotherapists should understand the 7 basic affective systems. We have found that the ancient subcortical regions of mammalian brains contain at least 7 basic affective systems. Here, we refer to these systems as seeking, expectancy, fear, anxiety, rage, anger, lust, sexual excitement, care, nurturance, panic and grief, sadness, and play, social joy. We will explain later why we use capitalization to label these systems. For now, suffice it to say that they designate specific functional networks of evolutionarily very ancient regions of our brains. This book should be of special interest to psychiatrists and other mental health professionals, as well as students of the affective, behavioral, and cognitive neurosciences, each of which takes a rather different approach to the study and discussion of emotions. Our focus here will be on the primary process nature of these systems, but we will not neglect the levels that most other investigators are studying: the secondary process, inbuilt emotional learning mechanisms, and the tertiary process, emotional thoughts and deliberations that are so evident in human experience. The failure of neuroscientists to deal empirically with the primary process, evolved level of emotional organization, is impeding as coherent a synthesis of different approaches as is currently possible in emotion studies. As one ascends through the evolutionary layers of the brain and mind, there are more and more diverse ways to envision emotional life. In contrast, there is abundant evidence indicating that the basic affective systems of mammalian brains are ancient universal value structures of mammalian minds that provide evaluations of the world in the form of categories of individual affective experiences. The further up one goes in brain-mind complexity, from primary to tertiary levels, the more variable and complex the overall equation becomes. Multiple emotional streams may cross in the thinking mind, creating an enormous variety of higher emotions that are often the focus of psychologists: pride, shame, confidence, guilt, jealousy, trust, disgust, dominance, and so forth, with hundreds of possible variants. However, without a clear vision of the primary processes, the important work on higher processes remains profoundly incomplete. We cannot have a credible theory of mind without a credible understanding of the basic emotional feelings we inherit as evolutionary tools for living. It is possible that the higher, socially constructed feelings all require certain permutations of our evolved capacities to feel certain ways. All aspects of mental life can be influenced by our primary process feelings, and the overall affective spectrum of the lower mind-brain is foundational for higher mental health issues. The extent to which the lower powers of the mind eventually come to be molded by the emerging higher functions will be of great interest in future work. We already know that higher brain processes can arouse emotions as dramatically as they reduce emotions. All this will remain a most interesting aspect of affective neuroscience for a long time to come. Physicians, especially psychiatrists, must know about these affective systems because they afford new insights into mind-body interactions. Some such interactions are already well known. Consider, for example, the misery of sustained anxiety, an expression of the fear system. Arousal of the fear system eventually leads to excessive production of cortisol. Under optimal conditions, when an animal is afraid, the secretion of cortisol mobilizes glucose as an energy supply for the skeletal muscles in case the animal decides to flee. In this way, cortisol secretion is beneficial. However, excessive secretion can begin to damage the body if elevations are sustained for too long. Normally, when cortisol has circulated through the blood back up to the brain, the paraventricular nucleus, PVN, of the hypothalamus exerts an inhibitory effect that stops further release of cortisol. If, however, a person or animal is subjected to an excessive amount of stress, when they are chronically frightened or anxious, the PVN may not be able to stop the production of cortisol. Although the intensities and time patterns of the emotional effects of cortisol can vary dramatically from one person to another, all visceral organs and many areas of the brain, as well as the immune system, can be adversely affected by a prolonged excess of cortisol. Many resulting stress-induced cascades in the brain and body can contribute to these adverse effects as well. Prolonged high cortisol levels are common in a number of psychiatric syndromes, most especially in depression. It is not known exactly how excessive secretion of cortisol can promote clinical depression. However, disruptions in the normal production of a variety of growth factors, such as BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, have been implicated. Play tends to promote positive affect partly through such chemistries, providing evidence for the common-sense principle that positive and negative feelings counteract each other in the affective economy of the mind. In addition, when people are severely depressed, they often suffer from hippocampal damage because an excess of cortisol can cause hippocampal cells to shrivel and at times even die off. Perhaps surprisingly to some, simply tickling rats and provoking the rats to laugh can promote the sprouting of new neurons in the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a brain structure that is essential for the creation of declarative and episodic memories, conscious memories of knowledge and experiences. Without this brain region, one would live in a perpetual present, with no memory of events that have passed. Thus, excessive cortisol release can participate in a number of serious mental disorders, including memory deficits. Similarly, in small doses, opiates will elevate mood and promote social solidarity. In large doses, they promote intoxication. In fact, appropriate amounts of endogenous opioids can have medically beneficial effects. For example, the placebo effect, whereby patients respond favorably to fake medications, can be explained in terms of this emotional chemistry. If a patient feels that his needs are being considered and tended to, then the positive feelings of being cared for are accompanied by the release, in the brain, of calming endogenous opioids, which diminish the feelings associated with the grief and panic system. In addition to producing good emotional feelings, opioids also reduce stressful arousal, reduce feelings of physical as well as psychological pain, and produce various immune benefits. So these patients will feel comforted and be much better off medically than they would be if they thought that no one seemed to care. We now know that the placebo effect is real medicine that operates mainly through the activation of brain opioid systems. These healing tendencies can thus be reduced and even eliminated by drugs like naloxone and naltrexone, which block the effects of opioids. In the past, when an apparently healthy patient appeared emotionally agitated and complained of physical symptoms, doctors tended to believe that the symptoms were psychosomatic, all in the mind, and therefore not physical or real. This is no longer an accepted view of psychosomatic illness. As soon as we recognize that affects emerge from emotional systems that are fueled by brain chemicals that can also exert an eventual effect on the functioning of the brain and the body, then the division between emotional and physical disorders narrows to the point of extinction. Although it may appear that the mind and the brain are different entities, the mind being incorporeal and the brain being physical, they are really one and the same thing. The mind-brain, or brain-mind, is a unified entity lacking any boundary within the body. It is integral to the physical system as a whole. An understanding of brain emotional systems and the psychological and bodily symptoms that they can generate is not only important for medicine in general, it also offers a totally new perspective for contemporary psychiatry. Affective neuroscience points the way to treating the real and specific symptoms of emotional imbalances, the natural endophenotypes of the brain-mind, rather than vague nosological abstractions such as autism, depression, and schizophrenia, which were handed down to us with pre-neuroscientific classifications of mental disorders. These diagnostic concepts have been inferred from average clinical presentations, but we now know that all of them are highly nebulous. Each diagnostic category is a conceptual umbrella for a host of overlapping mind-brain problems. For example, rats are inherently afraid of the smell of a predator. They also have an inherent fear of well-lit open spaces, and thus prefer to be in dark and hidden areas. They often also exhibit symptoms of fear, commonly measured by freezing behaviors, elevations in blood pressure, and increased frequency of defecation, when placed in an unfamiliar cage. Common anti-anxiety drugs, such as benzodiazepines, quell the fear of open spaces and of a new cage. Rats still remain afraid of predator smell, however, suggesting that this is a somewhat different kind of fear. Surprisingly, morphine, which is so effective in reducing separation distress, is able to reduce a rat's fearful responses to the smell of predators. Ordinarily, we lump different kinds of fear into a single category, but effective brain research suggests that there are neural models for distinct types of fear and anxiety. If this is so, then we should be able to develop specific drugs to treat each type. As we will explore in detail in a later chapter, there are convincing distinctions to be made between trepidation of the kind associated with physical danger, the fear system, and the panicky type of fear associated with separation anxiety, the grief and panic system. For quite a while, the development of psychiatric medicine has been stifled by man-made concepts, gleaned from complex symptomatology, rather than from brain research. If psychiatric research were linked more to the actual emotional symptoms of the mind-brain and more productively linked to functional neuroscience, we might make much faster progress. For instance, we might easily develop specific drugs for irritability and anger. This is presently difficult to achieve because no official diagnostic categories have been designed for excessive anger, except perhaps for intermittent explosive disorder. Yet society as a whole, and children in particular, are frequently victims of excessive rage. We already have medications such as substance P receptor antagonists and the drug aprepitant, a medication currently used to treat nausea, which should, if one can generalize from the animal data, reduce angry irritability. There is presently considerable excitement in pursuing a better understanding of such emotional endophenotypes so that our diagnostic tools can be radically revised and so that better medicines can be developed. Knowledge of the 7 basic emotional systems has begun to revolutionize the practice of psychotherapy because it offers the most comprehensive data-based brain taxonomy of primary process emotions that is currently available. Knowledge of these systems also entails a more comprehensive view of how human emotions operate. We help to provide a data-based taxonomy for discussing the foundations of emotional life, and we provide many examples of the importance of specific brain functions in affective life. For instance, the powerful role of endogenous opioids and oxytocin in the positive affect of supportive social relationships. This provides neurobiological support for the view that healthy emotional development relies heavily on maintenance of supportive human interactions. In dire circumstances, the prescription of safe medications that support such brain chemistries can promote and solidify psychotherapeutic practice. Just to highlight our approach to key conceptual issues in psychotherapy, let us consider how the present view contrasts with some of the tenets of classical psychoanalytic thought. We do this with intellectual admiration for the theoretical subtleties of that field. But here we focus mainly on how we would view primary affective processes differently than psychoanalytic theorists, whose views were based on clinical insights rather than on neuroscientific research. Although psychotherapy has evolved in many different directions in the past half-century, many therapists are continuing to rely on psychoanalytic theories to inform them about basic affects. Moreover, currently popular views of emotion, which envision some variation on a simple popular schematic of positive and negative affective valence, modulated by high and low arousal, have really not fallen all that far from the psychoanalytic tree. Freud maintained that human drives are rooted in our physiological needs, and he grouped these together into only 2 categories of drive: libido and aggression. Drives find psychic expression in wishful thoughts, in thoughts that are imbued with affective color. According to Freudian theory, the 2 main affects concerned wishes about sexual desires and aggressive urges. Freud argued for several types of drive expression, each rooted in different stages of libidinal development: oral, anal, phallic, and Oedipal. Aggressive drives were similarly partitioned along these developmental stages. This gave broader scope to the 2 interacting drives and their consequent affective wishes. Nevertheless, the range of discrete affects was considerably more limited than those produced by the 7 affective systems that have since been revealed by neuroscientific research. We are happy to note that the seeking system provides an interesting parallel to Freud's libidinal drive. insofar as he saw libido as a generic appetitive force, rather than in narrowly sexual terms. It is difficult to reconcile Freud's views on anxiety, however, as well as his views on lust in relation to attachment and affectionate bonds, and much else besides, with the knowledge we have derived from rigorous neuroscientific investigation. Most modern psychoanalytic and cognitive behavioral approaches to therapy fail to clearly identify seeking as a basic emotional urge. Some researchers also tend to confuse fear and panic and grief, seeing anxiety as a single manifestation. The importance of social interaction is also insufficiently highlighted in many psychoanalytic theories. Freudians see social interaction as a derivative means of gratifying sexual and aggressive impulses. Social needs are not seen as basic urges that might, at times, supersede sex or aggression in importance, even at the level of primary instinctual impulses. Although object relations theorists stress the importance of interpersonal needs, they tend to focus on early relationships within the family, particularly the mother-child bond. Today, we have more information about the importance of play, for example, and the associated basic psychology of social dominance. At the same time, what we have to offer here says little about the unique idiographic aspects of human mental life with which each psychotherapist must contend. There are higher tertiary process cognitive functions with which emotions will interact in real life. But by clarifying the primal mental energies that need to be considered as we try to help people in emotional distress, it may simplify the tertiary process tasks of the psychotherapist. How? That would require another book. But perhaps one insight may suffice for now. The lower brain seems to be organized in such a way that one primal affective state prevails at any one time. This monomania, for lack of a better word, also coaxes the cognitive apparatus to follow with obsessive, self-serving ruminations. The goal of therapy is to facilitate a more complex perspective, taking in the higher mental apparatus, what Aristotle called phronesis, becoming master of one's passions by understanding low-minded ways. Perhaps this central problem in the clinical practice of classic psychoanalysis can be addressed by affective neuroscience. As we see it, a key reason that classical psychoanalysis may have been less effective than it could have been lay in the fact that interpretation, the crux of the talking cure, was long deemed to be the main psychotherapeutic tool. Psychoanalysts tended to concentrate on the relationship between affective states and their corresponding cognitive manifestations, wishes. They have long assumed that by interpreting relevant thoughts and ideas, by uncovering their origins in childhood and explaining their primitive emotional meaning, a patient will be cured. But how do we know this can untangle the emotional knots of most people's lives? Suppose that in childhood a boy had endured physical and emotional abuse at the hands of his father. In adulthood, this man himself tended to bully those who were weak. A psychotherapist would help the patient to identify problematic areas in his adult personality, namely his tendency to bully or even abuse others, and would then trace these traits back to childhood. The therapist would perhaps interpret that this man bullied the weak and abused the vulnerable in order to vent his rage at his father in a way that would not result in retaliation. Other interpretations might highlight the possibility that he bullied others in order to restore his masculine self-esteem. As a result of these and still other interpretations, the patient would presumably be cured, or at least proceed to have a happier life. In this vision, cognitive issues were seen as a gateway to emotional ones. The psychoanalytic tradition was followed, during the behaviorist era with highly focused behavior modification therapies.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?